drawing production tab, and this is where all of the labeling tools are going to be. So it's kind of a slight thing to notice, but if you notice, we've got some red icons, and then you've got some blue icons. The blue icons are the old labels. So we have the place note that we've always had, like in MicroStation. You place text. The difference between those two is one has a leader line and one doesn't. That's just going to be static text with no intelligence. And then at some point they introduced the place label tool. So that's what we used for a long time for hand labeling to do our text favorites with. And so that's going to either place it by a text favorite or by a cell. And the cells themselves would have text favorites embedded in them. And the only reason we use cells is to get like the borders around the text, or have a special leader or dimension line, or if you needed a text separator. There was just things that we couldn't do with just a regular text favorite that we needed to be able to do. So we added those into cells. And then we did add the civil labeler, and so what that is going to support is going to be where you can add the borders to your text. So you can do that directly in your place label tool. So I say place label, but what I really mean is the civil labeler tool. So we can add those borders kind of on the fly. It's very flexible to edit how the labels are going to be placed as you're placing them. You can add the between lines, so that's going to be like between the lines of text, or below or above. You can also control how the dimension line, what dimension style you're using, or how the leader is going to operate. You want it to automatically flip, up or down, left and right. Lots of things we can do there, but the main power of the civil labeler is the ability to annotate information from multiple elements at once. So that means you can go and pick a pipe, and you can pick a node, and you can build one label that has information on both of those. Or maybe you can take a station offset from an alignment, or you can take an elevation from a terrain, but you can have multiple targets that build just one label. And then the other ones that I kind of skipped over is the element annotation and drawing model annotation. These are our automated annotation options. So if you're doing drawing model annotation, it's really in the name. That means it says drawing model, but you can also do this in your design model if you want to do like a plan grid. But really, it's going to be model annotation. So it's going to be cross section to get your grid. It's going to be profile, grid. It's going to be if you're in a plan sheet, it's going to be like your match line annotation. It's going to be like your north arrow. If you have any tables that you want to automatically place, it's information that it's model based. So normally it's going to be relative to a center line point. So if you're doing plan, it's all going to be measured. All the annotations that come in are going to be measured from a center line. And then we have element annotation, which is going to be feature definition based. So this is per element. So what it does is when you click on element annotation, whether you choose all elements or you go in and you hand select which ones you want, what it's really doing is it's reading the feature definition, and it's seeing what default annotation group you have assigned to that feature definition to know how to annotate it. So the example I use is stationing. So if you choose that element annotation, you pick your alignment, it's going to read that feature definition and know, which stationing annotation group to use. Now what you can do on top of that is you can do, overrides. So that was a really nice enhancement. So now, like for instance, for stationing, it was always a problem because sometimes you would have different scale sheets where you would want your stationing, your majors every 100 feet, and then sometimes you'd have a larger scale and you'd want to do maybe every 500 feet. And we didn't really have a method to do an override. So we had to create separate feature definitions to use for all those different scales and sheets. So now that we have, that override available, it's really nice because now if you have a larger scale sheet, you can just go pick a different annotation group, and it's a lot easier. So I'm going to focus more on civil labeler, but what I want to point out is you're going to do the majority and bulk of your annotation with annotation groups. So you're going to be using these tools quite a bit, and then you're going to be using the civil labeler more as a supplementer. So you're going to go in, and anything that you can't do with an annotation group, that's where you're going to use the civil labeler to go in and just supplement those annotation groups. They are dynamic, and they are going to update based off of design changes. You can also make them associated to the elements, so the labels move and shift with your elements as they move. But if you have to recut your sheets, you know, if you're placing these in a drawing model, you have to recut your sheets, you are going to lose your annotations. So it's better to lean on the annotation groups as much as possible because those are easily removed and replaced as opposed to your labeling. Alright, so here this what you're going to need to create your labels. So we're going to start with text style. So this is, everybody probably knows what text style is. This is just how we're going to format the text. So is this going to control our font, the spacing of the text, if we want an underline or not. You can even put in like italics, underline, like really all the settings you see over here. And it's primarily going to do your text size. So one of the big changes in OpenRoads is that you don't have all your different, is the annotation scale. So what that means is you aren't going to manually change the size of your text based off of the scale of sheet that you're using. So what you do is we build these text styles to be at a 1-to-1 scale so that when you apply a scale to your drawing model, it's going to automatically size your text up to whatever size it should be for that scale of sheet. So we're going to start with the text style that's just going to format the text. And then another piece that we're going to need is a dimension style. Again, not new. But this is going to control the leader line and the arrow that gets attached to your label. And then we're going to be building the text favorite. Now, normally you're going to be loading, so when you build the text favorite, you're actually going to be assigning a text style to the text favorite. So when you use that text favorite, it's going to automatically inherit that formatting. However, what I have found personally, and you can still do this, but what I have found to be probably a better option than kind of hard coding the text favorite with a text style, especially with annotation groups and labels, because a lot of times you're building those for special uses and they have to have different justifications or different fonts, different sizes. So instead of building a separate text style for every single case, instead what I'll do is I use the text styles maybe to set the size and the font, but then for everything else, if you expand this dialog and make it much larger, you can actually set everything else about it that you could normally do in a text style, and you don't have to then go and create 100 different text styles for all of your different annotations. But in here, what we're doing with the text favorite, this is going to be a reusable bit of text. So it's going to be a combination usually. It can just be static text like begin project, or it could have static text with a field. So it could be like station : which would be like your static piece. And then the field is going to be the piece that updates based on its position relative to another element or a property of itself. So what we're doing is we're building a label that is going to pull information from the civil element, and as the properties are changed in your design, then those text boxes are going to update for you automatically. Now these text favorites are going to be used in both the civil labeler, and they're also the same text favorites can be used inside of your annotation groups. But either way, when you do annotation, these first three building blocks are what you have to have. That's the minimum. And then if I look at annotation groups, those are built by annotation definitions. So this is actually what I'm looking at right here is an annotation group. And the group itself is just a container that's going to hold all of your definitions that I have listed in yellow on the left here. And each of these definitions is a different piece of text that is going to build the group. I think stationing is probably one of the most complex annotation groups. So you can see how many different definitions I have here. So I have one just for the major text, and then I have another one just for the major labels, and then I have another one for the minor text, and then the bearing label, and the length of the line label, and and so on, all my curve data. So there's quite a bit in here, but each one of those annotation definitions has its own settings to control what element template it gets placed with, what text favorite it uses, where it's going to be annotated along the elements, all the details that's going to define what that piece of annotation looks like. For the creation of the text favorites, we're going to really be exclusively working inside of the text favorite manager, although you can create the text favorites inside of just the regular place text dialog. But you're going to have the bulk of your functionality right here in this manager. So what I would recommend is don't recreate the wheel. If you're going to start creating text favorites, go and pull from our delivered workspace or somebody else's workspace that is published online. See what they have. Load it temporarily into your workspace environment and then copy from it. Of course, you're going to have to change the text format or the text style, or reorder the information to make it look like your standards. But as far as finding the actual field that you're trying to get at inside of those elements, sometimes it's a little tricky because there's a lot of civil properties going on behind the scenes. So the bulk of what you're going to be looking for is in the civil element properties. And they are broken up into like plan, profile, cross-section, which is helpful. Another thing they've added is this select element button, which is awesome because now you can go and just select the element that you want to get information from and actually pick the property, and it will direct you to where that property is down here in this dialog. But yeah, steal from another workspace and copy those up. And so you're going to copy those up into your DGN. I normally always do this in a Scratch file, so you can draw some elements and test it out as you go along. And then once you have the labels the way you want them, then you're going to copy them into your DGN lib kind of as a clean copy. But so here I just have like a station offset. So the station and the offset text, that's the static text. And then what you see over here, that is the actual field that is pulling from the element property. So once you select it down here, then you're additionally going to go over here and you're going to set your units. And I think I have a better slide for this here. So here is a little bit larger. Let me see. Let me back up. So for instance, the offset. So what we can do with the offset, that we have some settings for, do you want to show a negative or a positive? Do you want to have left or right, suffix or prefix? Do you want to, how do you want your units to be? What's your precision going to be? So you have all these settings for that, and you get a preview. And I recommend clicking on the save preview before you hit accept. And so that's going to be more obvious for the user. So when they're placing their text, if it's not actually grabbing a value, instead of just having like an actual value there, it's going to say like 0.00. So it's going to be obvious that it's not, a valid value. And then same thing for like alignment name or anything like that. It'll say like preview text, so you know that it's not. Maybe you missed the element. You didn't actually pick it. So just makes you more aware when you make mistakes. Let's see, I've got some tips here for it. So I already talked about the select element. Another thing is we have a couple of ways that we can copy file to file. You used to have to like kind of do a wildcard or like put it into your configuration to load the file and then copy it over. Because really what you're seeing here is this top folder is my file that I'm in now. So I've created some sort of Scratch file called text labels. And then these folders below it are actually coming directly from my workspace. So there's all my DGN libs. So if I want to pull any labels up here and do any editing, what I have to do is I have to expand these out, copy them, and then bring them up. But let's say that I created, labels in another DGN and I want to bring them over to this file or push them to my DGN lib in my workspace. The way that I would want to do it now, today, is I would go into the Explorer and, the section of the Explorer where you have your Open Road standards. And then in that dialog, you can right-click your standards and just say load a temporary DGN or DGN lib. And so you're basically just going to be directed to Windows Explorer. You can go and pick, whatever DGN you're wanting to pull them from, load it in, and then when you go back to this dialog, you're going to see that DGN or DGN lib listed there to copy from. When we're putting this in here, it can be static text only, so you can have like an existing ground or repeatable labels that you're using all the time. It doesn't have to be like a text field where it's actually pulling a property. when you're testing these, as long as you're not doing it, building a text favorite with multiple targets, you can test it really quickly using the place label tool before going all the way to the civil labeler. So I'd probably recommend that first. Make sure you're pulling the property you intended to, and then go in and set your civil label up. And like I said, we're going to use the delivered examples as a starting point, or your DOTs, or whoever you want to borrow from that might have similar standards as you do. So now getting into the civil labeler. So this was released in the version 10.10, which was about 3 releases ago. And it's going to allow us to not only control the border box. So if you notice over here in the dialog, I can set a frame, I can set a leader location, like style, I can override my text style, my dimension styles, or element templates even, like all right here. Or I can also opt to just use whatever the active is. Set your extension styles. So when you're creating these labels, the intent is to have a default setting. So you have it set up the way that you're normally going to be using it. But the nice part about the dialog is now it's not all hard coded. Like as you're placing it, there's a lot about the label that you could change, per use. So it makes it a lot easier to go in and place your labels. When we're doing this, you can pull from multiple information. So like for instance, this point right here, maybe I'm grabbing the station and offset from the alignment, but I'm getting the elevation from the actual point itself. So just pulling from multiple targets. So in 10.10, it was introduced as an XML based file. So very similar to how your template library gets loaded in. And it had a variable that brought it in there. And then you could have multiple XMLs, but you had to be very crafty with how you set up your configuration in order to get those to load in. But in the last release, which was 10.11, they actually allowed us to now put them in the DGNlib, which is really what it was intended for all along. It started off as a 10 preview, just kind of filling it out, and then they've been constantly enhancing it. And it's still not quite there, there's still areas where it needs improvements, but it's getting there. And it's a great improvement over just the standard place label tool.
Is there a way to pull those XML-based ones up then?
Yeah. So it's really just a right-click import into.
Okay.
Yep. They get stored in the DGNlib under the Explorer.
Okay.
Right where your annotation groups are. It's called label definitions.
Okay. Perfect.
And you manage them the same way too.
Okay. Thank you.
But over here on the left, this is going to be your list of labels. So standardization is really important when you're building your labels, your text favorites. You really want to come up with a good naming convention early. And then also, although your text favorites, when you place a label, like whenever I choose my text favorite in a list somewhere, it doesn't matter what folders I put in, folder structure I put in there. It's always just going to alphabetically list them. So for your text favorites, it's really important to come up with a naming convention that maybe you organize them by discipline, or so maybe you abbreviate. You have all your drainage labels go in together, all your roadway. You could also include like plan, profile, cross section, so kind of what their use, so that when they're in an alphabetical format, they're going to be in the list, an easy way to go and grab them. But when we're doing the civil labeler, we can put them in folders, and then when you're using them, you can just kind of open and collapse the folders as you need them. So you want to find some sort of happy medium between too many folders and not putting everything in one folder. But then still, it helps to have a good naming convention that's solid and consistent, so it's easy for you to find your labels. This is what it's going to look like when you're placing it. So we're not going to be able to change out the text favorite. We're not going to be able to change the location method, but we can change everything else. So I'm going to go over these settings individually. And actually, I'm just going to go ahead and play this video first. So what I'm going to do